Hi, my name is Maddie. I'm a student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in the Interdisciplinary Studies and Liberal Arts Department, and this is my research project on Banksy, a conversation beyond the wall. So first, who exactly is Banksy? Well, the short answer is no one really knows. He's an anonymous and controversial British street artist, first active in Bristol in the late 1990s. He then rocketed to international fame with his work on the West Bank Wall, which divides Israel and Palestine, in the early 2000s. Street art is not the only form of art that he dabbles in. He also does paintings, sculptures, has exhibitions, and even a few films. In 2010, he made the list of the world's most 100 influential people, along the likes of Barack Obama, Steve Jobs, and Elton John, just to give you some kind of idea of how influential he is in our society. But to this day, his real identity remains completely unknown. My two guiding research questions were, can a controversial anonymous street artist create real art? And what are the underlying meanings of Banksy's works that resonate with the public? I use two forms of methods in my research, but the first is background research. This includes scholarly journals, academic articles, films, multimedia, and tons of current news sources. And I primarily use background research to address my first question of, can artists like Banksy create real art? So I think the first step to talking about art is to define what art truly is. In order to do this, I used the University of Edinburgh professor Simon Folk's 5-step identifying process. Step one is to establish relative cultural context of the piece, which I believe is really key in understanding Banksy's work because his work holds such cultural relativism in our society today. Step two is to determine what properties give that piece its cultural context. Step three is to see if that piece is worthy of status of appreciation. Step four is to verify people who gave it that status are culturally aware. And step five is to determine what properties of the piece deserve the status it was given. So if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a piece now known as Love is in the Bin. It's from the Banksy's A Girl with a Balloon series. And this particular piece sold at a Sotheby's auction in late 2018 for $1.4 million. And you can see that it's shredded, but the piece was not like this when it was sold. It actually happened right when the camera hit the auction stand, when the sale was finalized, the piece began shredding itself. But the owner loves it even more this way and kept it, and the value of this art has actually doubled. It's now worth around $2.8 million estimated by Esquire. And so I think this is just a great example to show how Banksy is wanted in the art world, because one, it was sold at a Sotheby's auction, two, it kind of ended up destroying itself in a way, but actually made it more Banksy-esque and more desirable, and increased its value in the art world. Another really important thing to talk about when talking about street art is the law of ownership. So who finds the art, where it is found, what the purpose or intent of that piece is, and how the people of the area in which it's discovered interact with it are all determinants in who ultimately can claim ownership to the art. And because street art is becoming more and more commercialized, legality aspects often come into play. It's commonly produced in public areas, which leads to fights over who can really claim ownership of it. And a really great example of this is the Banksy piece Slave Labor, which was painted on the wall of a convenience store in London. Excuse me. But the piece was mysteriously taken out of the wall in the middle of the night. Like the entire piece of wall that the image was painted on was just removed, and there was a hole in the wall. And the citizens and the owners of the store were really, really angry and wanted to find out where the piece went because they really grew fond of the piece. And it ended up being found in an auction house in Miami, very, very far from its original home in London. And the residents of the small town really wanted it back, so they ended up fighting to get it back, and they succeeded. My second favorite method is a survey. I created the survey because I noticed a gap in literature addressing my second research question on the public's opinions on Banksy. And so I collected primary data. The survey was disseminated through social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook, thus making it a convenient sample. It was entirely anonymous. I ended up getting 73 respondents ages 18 to 62, and the bulk of the survey consisted of 4 images that I chose from a selection that I previously studied, and I picked these 4 particular images because I saw the artistic and political side in all of them. So the survey is called Opinions on Banksy's Work. It's a digital Google form with 4 sections. The first section is a familiarity evaluation of Banksy. This was just a yes or no question if you knew who Banksy was or not. If you answered yes, you'd then move on to the third section. But if you answered no, you would move to a second section, which just had a short description of Banksy as a way to increase the reliability of my survey and ensure that people knew who Banksy was before they answered the questions. And so section 3 consisted of 2 open-ended questions per each image, so 8 total, to gauge interpretations of Banksy's works. And the fourth section was demographic information, like age and political affiliation. So data was analyzed categorically in sections 1 and 4, and then through grounded theory thematic analysis in section 3. And data collection was approved by the Cal Poly IRB. So the 2 questions I used grounded theory to analyze were 1, what are your first impressions of the piece? And 2, what do you think Banksy intended with the piece? So what exactly is grounded theory? It's an analysis method that's basically used to identify common concepts within data. And then I used a subset of this called theoretical sensitivity, which basically just a way to stimulate easily overlooked messages within the data. And so I basically went through the answers and grouped things together, like if it was something emotional, just in the emotional category, or political, or love. It was just kind of to organize people's thoughts better. So this is the first piece. It's called A Girl with a Balloon. You might recognize it from the Sotheby's auction piece. And so for first impressions, 37% of people mentioned sadness or emotion, and then around 25 mentioned love or lost love, and around 25 mentioned childhood or innocence. And in terms of intent, 45% of people felt that it had something to do with emotion, either from society's lack of heart or generational differences. And then the remaining people associated it with holding on to love or losing love, or lost innocence. And then this piece is known as Flower Thrower, or is painted on the West Bank wall. And 22% of people saw it as an expression of anger. 19% of people saw it as war protest. And one thing I thought was particularly interesting with this one was that 16% of people used the phrase definitely art, which is really interesting since it was an open-ended question. So they really just saw it as art and saw that Banksy's street art is art. So yeah, in terms of intent, this one was the closest division, with about half people believing that it was political or social commentary, and the other half believing it was a depiction of love or hate. So our next image is this piece that says, I don't believe in global warming. The majority saw the irony or satire of the piece, and the remainder of people saw like the simplicity of it, or said that it was cool or clever. And in terms of intent, every single respondent said that it was political. So I thought that was very interesting. And then this last piece says, if graffiti changed anything, it would be illegal. And the overwhelming majority said, mentioned the irony of graffiti already being illegal. And the remaining people said they were confused or mentioned the rat, which I thought was interesting because the rat is kind of a Banksy icon. But so then in terms of intent, 42% of people mentioned the influence graffiti has. 40 mentioned the contradiction of the piece, being that it technically is illegal to take part in street art. And the remainder just said they were confused. So in conclusion, art has long served as a means of expression. The majority of people do consider Banksy's art to be art and have messages that extend far beyond art. And people see underlying messages of social and political commentary in Banksy's works. So where does that leave us today? Well, Banksy is still active. This is the piece behind the writing is one that he did on Valentine's Day in 2020. But we never know what's going to come next. Is it going to be a piece like this? Is it going to be some big exhibition? Or is it going to be a piece shredding itself on a Sotheby's auction stand? We don't know. But his style of art has really just influenced so many other artists. And we can see that through other artists like Mr. Brainwash, which is in his movie, actually, Banksy's movie. But lastly, we are just living in a time of expression. Humans are innately expressive. We've seen it since the earliest people have expressed themselves on cave walls. And people are going to keep doing street art. And street art is a really accessible way to express yourself artistically and get your art out there in the world. So thank you to Dr. Neal for being my advisor, and Dr. Valencia Laver for all of her help. And here are my references. Thank you.